Welcome to video lecture 14 of this course of studies in St. Thomas Aquinas' metaphysical teaching about the one and the many, on which I'm going to talk about the whole of philosophy and science being a consideration of organizational truth and by means of overcoming oppositions within the thing, using an ability to overcome oppositions, to understand how oppositions are overcome within things, to recognize organizational truth. In the last video lecture 13, I was talking how metaphysics is the queen of the sciences, and that study leads into this one in a way, because this internal opposition that occurs within organizations helps us to understand their unity, which constitute the truth conditions of what we study. And knowing how strong or weak an organization is enables us to understand how unbreakable is its unity, which gives us the measure of truth that a thing contains, its measure of greatness, of quantity, of unity. Unity is the principle by means of which and through which we know everything. Everything we know in terms of a one, including existence. So it's by means of knowing existing ones, and the strength of unity that we have, that they have, that we in some way grasp the differences that exist among individual things, species, and genera, genuses. In video lecture 13, I was talking about why metaphysics is the queen of the sciences, and I did so in 7 topics. This lecture, I'm only going to talk about 4 topics, but the first one is very long, so even though it's only 4, just getting through that first lecture is going to be difficult, but I should be able to get through the first 2 without this first discussion becoming 2. That is this first part of these 2 videos that I'm going to do on video lecture 14, without either one of them being too long. The last time, the first topic I considered was how, for St. Thomas, the principle of highest species unity, that is, leadership, causes metaphysics to be the queen of the sciences. And the reason I focused attention on this was because of the fact that leadership involves strength of possession, of unity. It's the means by which we know greatness, quantity. Quantity is a kind of greatness, and it can either be an immaterial greatness or a dimensive kind of greatness, a qualitative greatness or a quantitative greatness in the way in which mathematicians speak about it. And the leader is the chief principle that holds organizations together, and so is a sign of that greatness. Now, the leader of an organization is not necessarily the titular leader, the one who has a title of being a leader. But in any organization, there is one part more than any other part that's the chief measure, right, by means of which an organization is held together and therefore known, who acts as a sign of organizational greatness. The greater the leader, the greater that leader should be in maximizing the communication of an organizational aim throughout the other members of the genus, and therefore becomes the chief measure by means of which the organization is not only held together but is known. So this notion that a leader in some way is a sign is crucial to understand, because in understanding the nature of organizations and through their operations, their effects act as signs, which I'm going to talk about in this lecture today after doing this initial review. For St. Thomas, the second topic I considered last time was why a higher science of leadership, metaphysics, must exist. And the reason for that for St. Thomas, as for Aristotle, is because if you don't have some sort of a knowledge is the measure of all other knowledge, that which if there is nothing we know best that we're using to know everything else, that we grasp without any other kind of assistance, but simply on the basis of the power of our own faculties, the reliability of our own faculties, then all our knowledge becomes a belief system. And our understanding of belief totally collapses, because belief, strictly speaking, depends upon our willingness to accept the truth of what someone else is saying. It's a kind of vicarious knowledge. But if no knowledge exists whatsoever, that's the foundation of all our other knowledge. If there's nothing we know best that we're using to measure all our other knowledge, what are we using? Well, we can't use belief, because belief presupposes the existence of knowledge. So what happens to belief? It becomes reduced to some sort of a feeling. But how could you have a feeling without having knowledge? Even an emotion depends upon knowledge. So our ability to understand anything at all totally collapses, and our thinking becomes reduced to skepticism. What happens is that philosophical metaphysics becomes replaced with some sort of political substitute. Some sort of totalitarian political rule, where collective agreement, collective wills, or collective emotions in some way becomes the rule and measure of truth. In our own day, this is happening by means of the use of utopian socialism, which is supposed to generate our awareness of what true science is, and that the whole of science is supposed to lie in mathematical physics as gurus who inhabit academic departments and are supported by politically influenced foundations tell us we are supposed to think about things. I totally reject that understanding. I think it's false. I maintain St. Thomas and Aristotle also rejected it. So these are some of the dangerous results that happen. You either have a choice of having a real metaphysics where all human beings have organizational principles that exist in public independently of our minds, as well as human faculties that are able to know these principles of organizations are reliable. There are truth conditions in things, powers of apprehending truth in the mind, which give us public standards of truth, so that we don't have to depend upon politicians to tell us what is true or what is false. Ultimately, this is what this becomes reduced to, or you have courts that will tell you what scientific thinking is about this or that matter. From this, I talked about how, in modern terms, what St. Thomas and Aristotle were talking about when talking about metaphysics is systems analysis and leadership studies, because the metaphysics studies the principles that cause all multitudes to become unified and operational. In doing that, what they're doing is studying the principles of all science, and because these principles are the means, the measures through which we know organizational unity and the level of organizational unity, organizational greatness. They're the principles of all leadership, because leaders not only transmit aims that hold together organizations and give them their, in that respect, give them their unity, but they also are able to understand the nature of receptivity and resistance within things. And by having a relationship to a greatest possessor of unity within an organization that communicates an organizational aim, a hierarchy among members of a multitude comes into being. It's only through the distribution of inequalities and a communication of the existence of inequalities within multitudes that we can get organizational unity. And without an organizational leader, who in some highest part that actually does this, the organization falls apart. So by means of a loss of aim, an organizational will fall apart, and also by means of the destruction of a leader who chiefly communicates that to a group, to a multitude. These are the two chief ways in which organizations tend to collapse. The organizational leader knows, in the human sense, knows the kind of resistance that a multitude can pose to taking directions, to cooperating in the pursuit of a common aim, and it understands how to overcome that. It doesn't complain about it. You can tell when you're not dealing with an organizational leader, when the person who is supposed to be the greatest manifestation of organizational unity and communication of organizational aims to a group says, well, I can't lead these people because they just won't listen to me. They won't cooperate. Well, good leaders are precisely the people who know how to get people to cooperate. And these good leaders sometimes are bad leaders in the sense of morally bad. But they get people to cooperate, which is what leadership always involves in a human sense. And in a non-human sense, there is some sort of a part within an organizational multitude, an organic multitude or inorganic one, which enables all the other parts chiefly to cohere together. And when you find that breaking point in a substance, then you find its weakest point. St. Thomas notices this hierarchy within physical things of qualitative unity, which is an accidental type of unity, and quantitative unity, in which the quality is inhere, and substantial unity. So these are different levels of strength, levels of unity, levels of greatness of unity, and of different measures of strength. People involved in specific sciences understand those different levels of strength and of opposition and of resistance that occur within physical things and non-physical things for that matter, in political associations and economic ones, units, organizations, and so on. According to St. Thomas, the metaphysical reasoning, like all other reasoning, starts with an induction process, an abstracting process by means of which we start to apprehend the measures of unity that exist within things, and how we induce, how we abstract those principles depends upon what is being known and our habits of knowing. Each of the sciences is properly defined in terms of an external stimulus of an internal power. I'm going to talk about this more later, but it's the quality of power in relationship to the quality of unity that a thing has, that determines the scientific capacity of the mind. And metaphysics achieves its formal object, that which is externally stimulating it, with the help of the imagination, just like the external senses do help us in achieving knowledge in physics, the formal object of physics, and mathematics does it by being able to apprehend the figured body that underlies qualitative differences. Our focus of attention, and how we are able to imagine that external stimulus as generating this organizational unity which interests us. It generates in us a different induction process, a different starting point. So if you try to claim that this person who's engaged in physics, like the classical physicist studies, must use your induction process as a mathematician, you're engaged in a kind of intellectual imperialism. It's no more legitimate than it is to claim that you all have to have the metaphysical induction process, that you all have to have the same way of imagining, or when those different modes of imagining will not be adequate for you to induce the knowledge of the causes that you're studying. The greater the intellect, the more powerful the intellect, the different induction procedure that a person is going to have to engage in. And they're not going to engage in the same sort of induction, even within the same discipline. So this notion that only physical science possesses a procedure called induction, which is inexplicable for the most part, aside from historical description, as far as I can tell, and does not fully represent the nature of science, but just a starting point for it, because science concludes in deduction, right, and demonstration as part of the explanatory process. Anyway, the last topic I discussed was whether or not St. Thomas contradicted himself when he claimed that the induction process for metaphysics starts with knowing that things are but not what they are. And I said, no, he doesn't, because he claims that in a way we do know what metaphysics studies, even though it is immaterial. We have some sort of an awareness of immateriality, and even in relationship to God when we're demonstrating the existence of God. But we know this, our induction process starts with a generic awareness. And this is true with the induction process all along. But it's just more remote type of generic understanding. It's also very true in practical knowledge. Anybody that's doing any kind of practical or productive knowledge, engaging in that, is aware of the fact that very often you don't know exactly what you're doing. You want to do something, you want to make something, but precisely, fine artists are in this kind of situation all the time. So, which is a process of induction. Now, what I want to do with respect to the first of the four topics today is to talk about how the formal object of science acts as an external sign that is communicating internal opposition. It communicates this to a scientific habit of mind, and in doing so it's communicating some sort of internal necessary relations that cause organizational and operational unity to exist among opposing parts. It's kind of a complicated way of talking, but the point is that science starts with external signs. And as I think the person who best understands the notion of signs today is John Deely. John points out how what we generally call signs are actually sign relations. That a sign is a relation that exists among extreme differences. So it exists between contrary opposites in the language in which St. Thomas and Aristotle would put it, and it holds these opposites together in a unity. So our first awareness of activity in things from which we start our induction process is an awareness of internal opposition, some sort of an opposition that is happening, which is generating action. And what we want to know is what's the multitude that lies behind this externally unified operation? What is the we're seeing the result as a kind of a whole, which is being produced by a cooperation of parts. And what we want to understand when we're thinking scientifically is, what are those parts that are unequally related? Science starts with the stimulation of a habit, which exists within a faculty which exists within the human soul. No soul, no human faculties, no human habits, no science. No philosophy, since philosophy and science are identical. If what I'm saying is correct here, and what St. Thomas is maintaining is correct, that science and philosophy are human activities, and they are humanly generated knowledges, and that they are properly defined by the external stimulation of an internal habit. It's only by understanding the essential relationship between that external stimulus, which is an organization, and this internal habit that you properly define science. You deny the reality of human habits, you deny the reality of internal organizations within things, and you cannot possibly possess science, or philosophy for that matter. And that's why I deny that what is commonly called philosophy today, what is commonly called science today, could possibly exist. And why I maintain that the people who maintain that they are practicing philosophy and engaged in science must be wrong. They don't know properly how to define their subject matter. Because the subject of a science is defined in relationship to the habit it's stimulating. That's how we know the unity that is existing within the genus. We've created an organization right here. Right? And we're analyzing it. The thing known and the knower are part of the same organization of scientific knowing. Right? Apart from that, science is inexplicable. And what happens is, you find that people will maintain that there is no internal unity in things. Right? That's a silly notion. We'll just say that there are laws that, and we'll describe laws. Right? And we can't define science in terms of human faculties or powers, so we'll define it in terms of historical relations and utopian dreams and fantasies and fables about the emergence of human consciousness from states of backwardness to states of enlightenment, or impossible dreams that we're overcoming, and so forth. I maintain that what St. Thomas is saying, what Aristotle is saying, is not only more commonsensical, but it's more in touch with the proper way of expressing intelligible speech. That what happens is that these ways of trying to explain science wind up degenerating into sophistry and skepticism, and they become indefensible. Etienne Gilson's wonderful work, The Unity of Philosophical Experience, is a great example of the attempt to deny the reality of these fundamental principles of the reliability of the sense faculties and intellectual faculties, and that organizational principles exist in things that are knowable to the human intellect. The truth exists in things. There are faculties that human beings possess that know the organizations in things, and the unity of these two, this internal faculty being externally stimulated through an induction process and grasping the internal unity of things in its organizational multitude and conflict. A person who's studying an organizational multitude is not studying something static. Aristotle's notion of substance is not static. it's more static than St. Thomas's is because of St. Thomas's teaching about existence. Still, even there, it's not static. There's an inequality of possession and privation that exists within a multitude of parts. Just take a look at any one of Aristotle's works, like his Politics, or his Ethics, or his Metaphysics, where he talks about this great organizational unity, which starts on a lowest level and grows out of it into an organizational whole in relationship to a final aim that is originated through a natural desire. And you'll see the dynamism in that teaching. In John Deely's way of talking, the physical object that is being studied in organization consists of a kind of semiotic web. It's a communication system. And this is why I said that we could talk about this in terms of systems analysis. A communication system, which is like a performance activity that is going on, an orchestration of cooperation and resistance. Galileo talks about the fact that we do not know what changes, and change does not occur until receptivity overcomes resistance. To the extent that receptivity and resistance to an act are equal, nothing's going to move. In examining the unity of a thing, what we have to be considering is the relationship of parts to each other and to a whole, and to a chief aim of the whole as communicated to the parts through a highest part. This would, if you're engaged in military science, that's certainly what you're doing. But you can do this with respect to any kind of multitude of things, where you're considering how the nature of this unit is a complex of internal relationships that, through the action of a thing, display external signs, like the qualitative aspects of a thing are a sign of its dimensive quantitative relationships, and why things, for example, that have different shapes will be resistant to different qualities, or sizes, for that matter. And how the different dimensions that things have will enable them to certain qualities of a thing to distribute actions. That's why you need wheels that are circular, in order to move automobiles. And the external qualities are signs of these dimensive quantitative kinds of relationships and strengths and weaknesses, which are signs of substantial unity within things. And we try to come to understand the substantial unity of a thing, the unity of the internal organization, through the unity of its external delivery system, through its species activities and its operations, and the way all of these are related to its chief leader, who becomes the measure of the strength and weakness of the organization as a whole. Now, why we use organizational unity, this complexity of relation of part to part and parts to whole, as the standard of judging, right? As the formal object, the internal measure, is not something about which we should wonder. And I cite a great quote from Mortimer Adler about this. in his introductory work to the great books of the great books of the Western world, how the relationship that truth has to error is of a one to a many. That truth is the measure, and that truth is it always exists in a kind of a unity, so that it's by being able to overcome the oppositions, to be able to explain the weaknesses and strengths of them, right? That they cannot resist. Right? The unity that is contained within the right relations, right? To the organizational whole, that we come to know the splendor of truth, right? Or as he puts it, the brilliance of truth. But Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict would both agree, and so would Pope Francis, that there's a certain splendor or brilliance or beauty. The beauty of truth becomes manifest in its fullness through the recognition that truth, when existing in this organizational setting, displays not only the level of existence of a thing, the greatness of existence of the existence of a thing, but the greatness of unity, and you have those four transcendental properties most clearly displayed in its fullness. So the truth that an internal organization contains is one that manifests all four of those transcendental characteristics, which in some way are contributed to by means of those different causes, those four causes as well. The formal, efficient, final, and material. But I'm not going to go into that. I've talked about that in the past, and I don't want to try to figure out how to relate the four causes to the four transcendentals. I'll let somebody else take that up. Having completed those two topics for this part of the discussion, I'm going to leave that off. Come back to the next two for video lecture 14. Welcome back to video lecture 14, where I've been talking about the nature of philosophy and science to involve the study of organizations and organizational unity in terms of understanding, or through an understanding of organizational opposition, understanding the nature of organizational opposition and how to overcome organizational opposition. And I talked at the beginning of this series of courses, lectures, in this first course, about the fact that St. Thomas's teaching related to organizations, and by the end of it I had hoped to make it intelligible to you, so that it would become much easier to understand and to appreciate. Hopefully by now that's starting to happen. In recognizing that when St. Thomas is talking about a substance, he's talking about a genus, he's basically talking about an organization. When he's talking about a species, he's talking about an operational organization. And when he's talking about science, he's talking about a habit of mind. You can't, or philosophy, he's talking about a habit of mind, essentially related to different organizations. He and Aristotle had maintained that there are three types of common matters, which are these organizations that we can know scientifically or philosophically. Two of them, they say, are perceptible by our senses. The first by our external senses, physics. The second by external and internal senses, chiefly the internal sense of the imagination, which helps us to apprehend mathematical unity, organization. And then a highest type of organization, a metaphysical kind of, or immaterial organization, totally immaterial, in the sense that it doesn't depend upon matter for its existence or for being known. The each of which have different levels of internal strength. And internal strength being an indication of the internal measure through which we know organizations and we can apprehend their truth. So they call this organizational unit a formal object, and by which they mean what today we'd call an external stimulus. And this faculty that we have is of knowing that is a habit, according to the psychology of St. Thomas, exists within a certain faculty. That habits of knowing exist within the intellectual faculty. Habits of hoping and despairing and fearing and being angry and so forth exist within an intellectual faculty, or what people would commonly call powers. Human beings have internal powers, internal sources, principles of origination, their own internal organizations. Human action always presupposes external stimulus. All of these faculties exist within the human soul of the human being. And so the complete understanding of what human science is cannot possibly be achieved without understanding the existence of human faculties within a human soul. And we can't possibly understand the unity of science or its complexity if we deny the reality of the human soul, if we deny the reality of human faculties and human habits. Once you start to admit the existence of human habits, you have difficulty not accepting the reality of human faculties, because those habits exist somewhere. And for them to belong to one individual, there must be this one being that has this multitude of acts. If it exists in the intellect as an intellectual habit, that intellect has to exist somewhere in some person. And where in the person does it exist? It's got to exist in some principle out of which it developed, its life principle, the soul. So the attempt not to connect science with the existence of human faculties in the soul seems to be a fruitless endeavor, which I'll let others try to accomplish if they will, but I doubt they can do it. I've seen people try to do it, and I've never come across anybody who has been able to do it. Now, I have two other questions that I want to discuss in this examination of organizations and this formal object that's stimulating the organizations. And one has to do with failures, with why disagreements, objections, failures are the essential and enabling means for philosophical and scientific progress, organizational progress. Adler already indicated this, that the greatness of the truth, the splendor of the truth, the strength of the truth within an organization depends upon its ability to overcome attacks on it, to understand its strengths and weaknesses, understand its internal qualities, its internal strength. As St. Thomas says, we can understand why metaphysics is the queen of the sciences by studying the nature of rule, that is, by studying the nature of measure. And then he talks about how strength is the measure of rule, that strength of intellect in relationship to the strength of the unity that is in thing. It determines the greatness of a measure and the greatness of a rule. So the greater the organization, the greater internal strength it has. And strength is a quality. When Thomas is talking about immateriality, what he's talking about is quality, or what Father Crowley talks about, virtual quantity. We would talk about it today as a kind of concentration of power. The greatness of the internal concentration of power, the intensity with which an individual can cause without external assistance, is an indication of internal strength. the less you can, the greater the acts that you can perform, the more the causal efficacy, and that's what I'm talking about, their greatness. The greater your causal influence, without depending upon external assistance, the more internal power that you have, the more organizational power that you have, is a measure of organizational greatness. Now, organizational greatness cannot often be known. It's virtually impossible to know without having your weaknesses tested, without having your strength tested. So the extent to which organizations are able to withstand external attacks gives them their understanding of the qualitative extent of their receptivity and receptivity, their resistance and receptivity to qualitative influences from the outside. And it's only by the matching of the qualities, notice, of the thing known and of the knower, that you can establish a relationship, because the principles of communication, of action between things, are founded upon complementary relationships, opposing but complementary relationship. The power to see and the power to be seen. It can't be too great, can't be too far away, can't be too small. This cannot be, the seer can't be too far away. He has to have an adequate power. The power of the thing seen can't be too intense. It's this unification of opposites that's constantly explaining how actions occur, and how there's a harmonization that results from having a complementarity between organizations that are qualified to act and react to each other. Now, in organizational development, it's crucial to have tests of strength, especially before you need to understand how strong or weak your organization. So your organizations constantly have to be doing this. And one of the ways that this is done is by asking the right questions at the right times, for example, in board meetings with people. And the reason that you want to ask the right question at the right time is so that so that you're on the, as they'd say, as one would say, as it said, so you're on the same page, meaning you belong to the same genus. Right? If you don't have a sense that you are talking about the same thing, right? In the same way, in a general way, you don't belong to the same genus. You're not part of the same organization, right? So the first thing that you have to do in order to attack organizational problems is to have something confront you that has an organizational relation, right? Something that in some way threatens your organization or enhances it. And questions in meetings with people, communicating, are one way in which people often do that. But you've got to ask the right question. You don't ask a question that's totally unrelated to the organizational activity and the organizational aim. If you do that, then you are not asking that question as a member of the organization. And remember, human beings have complex habits, complex powers, complex abilities, and very often we forget. Well, you know what role, what professional role, we're engaged in at the moment. And we have to be brought back to it before we can start to make any kind of progress. So asking the right question that causes problems, causes difficulty, that enables people to understand the weaknesses, that brings them to conditions of failure, especially before a greater kind of failure would befall an individual or an organization as a whole, is a great good. This is why people who are professionals tend to welcome certain kinds of failures because it gives a person with a sense of organizational leadership the understanding of just how strong or weak the organization is. And it's also one of the reasons why a leader has to have a good sense of this. A leader who represents the organizational strength of an organization to other leaders, especially to political leaders, for example. Your organization might be extremely strong, but you have a weak leader, organizational leader, and so you'll miscommunicate. Some people will think you're a lot weaker than you actually are when you're a lot stronger. This happens very often when you have fools who are leading organizations, and that will cause a lot of conflicts. But all great artists, all great artists in the sense of painters or sculptors or musicians, all great business leaders, military leaders experience failure, and the greatness of their leadership ability comes from their own internal qualities of receptivity and resistance. To understanding how to deal with those failures. Now, if you take in other words, the key to understanding the metaphysics of St. Thomas and his teaching of the unity and multiplicity, or the problem of the one and the many, is that there's a distribution of receptivity and resistance within all multitudes, all wholes that exist within the physical universe. And philosophers, scientists are curious about this, understanding this receptivity and resistance that these wholes possess. And the leader, especially of any kind of field, wants to understand this and is able to overcome it. Now, in distributing philosophical understanding, this metaphysics of understanding, which is the study of metaphysics is, strictly speaking, in studying organizations, a metaphysics of leadership. But what you do is you transmit it now to other organizations. When you're talking about distributing resistance and receptivity to a health organization, well, you're talking about inequality of possession of health, of the least healthy to the greatest in health, the most diseased and the least diseased. In economics, the least wealthy, the most wealthy. In politics, the least peaceful, the most peaceful. The qualities. You have to understand what is being distributed throughout this multitude that's giving it its organizational unity, right? And know how to influence it, know how to alter it, know how to regulate it. But first you have to understand it. And you have to move just these general metaphysical principles of organization. With respect to business or military or leadership that deals with administration of human beings politically, you're dealing with people who can resist taking directions physically, as well as emotionally, volitionally, by means of the will and by means of the intellect, and by means of external circumstances and conditions. Right? So a person who's leading people has to understand how the circumstances and conditions of the existence of these people. Who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with somebody wealthy? Am I dealing with somebody politically connected? Am I dealing with somebody who's wealthy and politically connected? Someone who's got a lot of friends, for example, a lot of influence that could in some way enhance or damage what I am attempting to do. I have to measure the physical strength of the individual with whom I'm dealing. Size that person up, as we'd say in Brooklyn. In addition to doing that, you have to you have to size up a person in other ways, like what's the emotional strength and weakness of this individual? What's the psychology of the human emotions? What motivates people? The two chief motivators of human beings are love and hope. All emotions that regulate our ability to pursue or not to pursue something are determined by species of hope, which is a species of love, liking some things and not liking some other things. And so you change what people's likes or dislikes, or what they can hope to achieve or not hope to achieve, and then you understand how to do that. You understand human motivation. Now you can do that through physical force, through threats, but you don't do that as an intelligent leader. And you can understand how to move the human emotions. You can understand how to move the human will and how to move the human intellect. But these are the way people can resist as human beings, taking direction from leaders. And good leaders know how to influence that, and bad leaders don't understand that psychology, aside from the fact that either it comes through fear or it's incomprehensible. We have bad leaders in the sense of people who simply use threats and intimidation to try to get people to take directions. And bad leaders who are simply clueless people. Good leaders have good and bad leaders, in the sense of excelling as leaders, have one quality in common. They have strength of will, and they can impose this. Good leaders do it through virtue. Bad leaders do it in any way that they can, up to the point where they understand that they're not going to get people despondent and therefore make them reckless. The other type of bad leader is the person who's got a wishy-washy will, who's vacillating, who's a kind of figurehead, a puppet, who's been put in office because of relations or connections or whatever, and is really clueless as to what to do in this or that situation, and more or less gets slapped around by this individual or that individual, and is not really what holds an organization together, and eventually tends to get thrown under the bus by the people who are actually controlling an organization. And so anyway, this gets us on to the last question. Within this video lecture 14, why the whole of philosophy science is an exercise in relating genera and species, the essential parts of a definition to explain the nature of an organization. Right? Remember that an organization is composed of a principle or causes of unity. That's the genus. Huh? In addition to having a cause of unity, to be operational as an organization, it has to have a distribution of labor. It has to be able to engage in activities and distribute organizational unity through the distribution of a common aim, so a corporate activity, what we're all seeking to achieve. It's got to have a mission statement, a strategic plan, tactical operations, internal delivery system, external delivery system, satisfaction of a customer in some way. And philosophical scientific examination. The customer in question of philosophical examination is the satisfaction of the inquirer. The scientific investigation, the scientific quest is not over until a person is intellectually and volitionally satisfied by the intellectual achievement, that this is a well done or well made activity, or well thought out operation. In order to get that that kind of mature development, where you can go through this complete process of discovery and start and finish this process of wonder through a hope-filled purpose and unity of a single-mindedness of mind and will within an organization, you have to go through repeated acts of failure that help you come to a better understanding at one point or another point of your self-definition. Right? We define things through specific differences, and in a process of doing that, as human beings, we have to ask questions. Very often we can't come up with the specific difference that we need to understand how this type of organization is precisely different from that, how this thing over here precisely differs from that over here, because we don't have that one key part of a puzzle that enables us to understand how it performs the operations it's performing, and where those acts are coming from within its organization. And until you find that specific, like in trying to discover a disease, what's the specific cause of this disease or that disease? Well, it's only by repeated failures, right? That's part of a definition. Right? Very often people don't realize this because defining things is so natural to us as human beings. We don't realize we're engaged in this activity of repeatedly defining for each other precisely what we're doing and when we're doing it. So that's why we have to ask the right questions at the right time to get us into the same genus. Then once we're in the same genus, in other words, we're part of the same organization, we're on the same page. Okay. Now we got to be on the same paragraph on the same page, right? To understand what it is that has to be added to our organizational activity, so as to understand how this operation is taking place. You're getting beaten. You're a football coach, and you getting beaten in every game by one particular team, and you can't understand why you're doing it, or how this is happening to you, because you're supposed to be great. Huh? Well, until you pick up that one organizational difference, that specific play that somebody else is making at that specific time, you can't define the problem. And if you can't define the problem, you can't solve the problem. In other words, all solutions to problems, all testing of problems comes from precise definition. Testing is not, as I've said several times before, it does not occur through empirical observation. It comes through intellectual apprehension of precise and exact definitions. And you only get at the precise and exact definitions through proper ways of imagining things, precise ways of imagining things, through proper ways of imagining for different types of organizations, through different types of failures and different types of successes. So success and failures are essential to arriving at specific differences for understanding operations that are particularly puzzling. And that's one of the reasons why very often your friends are the least helpful to you in trying to solve those issues, and people who are royal pains are very often who you think are your enemies tend to be your greatest friends. Well, I'm leaving off with that, and we'll come back to video lecture 15, our concluding lecture, where I'm going to try to sum up more for you what it is that we've covered in these different lectures, and in this video, in this transcript that accompanies this. And I hope you've enjoyed this up to this point, and we have one more to go, and I hope you'll enjoy that one. And that by the time you finish the course, you will understand why it's virtually impossible for anybody to understand. It is totally impossible for anyone to understand the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas without understanding his teaching on the one of the many. And it's pretty much impossible for anybody today to claim to be either a student of St. Thomas, properly speaking, or for that matter, a philosopher or scientist.